Welcome, everyone. I'm Patricia Shampton with the Texas Exes, and today is our September Lunchtime Lecture. We're so happy that you could join us today. And we'd like to start off by thanking our sponsor, UT's Extended Campus. Extended Campus offers graduate programs, professional certificates, and skill building courses to support your career goals no matter what your next step is. Texas Exes members can also get a 10 to 25% discount on non-credit professional education courses. You can learn more at the link that we will drop in the chat right now, but that is extendedcampus.utexas.edu. Today's lecture is titled, What Will Be Our Sources of Energy in the Mid-21st Century? And we're super honored to be joined by Dr. Ehud I. Ronn, professor of the Department of Finance at the McCombs School of Business. Dr. Ronn has been a faculty member at UT Austin since 1988 and earned his PhD from Stanford. His distinguished career includes roles at Merrill Lynch and Morgan Stanley, and he was the founding director of the UT Center for Energy Finance. He has also been recognized by Energy Risk Magazine as a member of their Hall of Fame. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Ehud I. Ronn.
Okay. Thank you, Patricia. I think I would ask you to relinquish, if you would, the lecture so that I can share. Okay. So, yeah, that's not it. What I would like to share is this. Okay. So thank you again. I would like to thank Patricia and her colleagues for the invitation that Texas Exes has extended to me to present here. So it's an honor to do so, and thank you for the invitation. I'd like to thank the organization, Texas Exes, for their support of UT and, of course, for their support of our Longhorn students. So what I'd like to talk about today, ladies and gentlemen, is this issue of the primary sources of primary energy to the mid-century. And if you'll permit me, I'd like to present the overview of what it is that I'm going to do. So I'm going to start by talking about what primary energy is. Maybe most people know that, but I want to make sure we're on the same page. Then what I would like to do is share with you the forecasts provided by 6 public and private sources of this information. And as you look at this, you'll see that there are both public and private. I guess I just said that. The Energy Information Administration is the research arm of the Department of Energy. The International Energy Agency is an agency affiliated with the OECD, the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development. So that's that. ExxonMobil, you all know. DNV is a company that provides quality assurance and risk management, and they have these forecasts as well. BP is the British company, of course, and Bloomberg, BNEF, stands for Bloomberg New Energy Finance, and they also provide these forecasts. When I present that, or after I present that, I'd like to talk briefly about nuclear energy, both in the state and the world. And then, if you'll permit me, I'll talk about some of the consequences of some forecast errors / policy actions. This may become a little bit more controversial, and you'll know that as a finance person, I'm going to judge these things in dollars and cents. I realize consequences of any action can be far beyond dollars and cents, but dollars and cents is what I'll present to you. And then I'll conclude and be happy to address Q&A at any time, as has already been indicated. So, what is primary energy? Primary energy is that energy found in nature that has not yet been modified by humanity. So it includes the traditional sources that you would expect: oil, natural gas, coal, solar, wind, hydropower and geothermal, and nuclear energy. You can see that there's a division here between the old renewables and the new renewables. Hydropower and geothermal have been around for over 130 years. Technically, they're renewable, but they're broken out separately. So, primary energy is the foundational input. It is what generates other forms of energy, such as electricity. I'll be talking about the primary sources of energy in this talk. Always remember to silence your cell phone. Okay, so let me start with the EIA, the U.S. Energy Information Administration. What I have for you here is the division that the EIA does for both the US and globally. So they predict both of these. They forecast both of these. And as you can see, they divide them into these broad categories that you see over here. So oil and natural gas in the US around 70%. In the rest of the world, they're forecasting about 50%. Coal is an interesting distinction between the US and the rest of the world. And I was surprised by this bearish forecast myself. It turns out that what the EIA is projecting for Africa and the Middle East is actually an increase in coal production over the next 30 years. And so that's what's driving that number over there that is certainly higher than in the US, but higher than I think most people have a feel for in terms of where coal is going over the next 30 years. So that's that number over there. Nuclear, as you can see, in the US, 9, perhaps 10%, the rest of the world staying around 4 or 5, and then you see the renewables. And the renewables are between a fifth and a fourth of the total energy production that the world is anticipating by the time we get to 2050. So that's what the EIA is telling us. And what you see here, I won't take too much of your time on this, but what you see here is essentially different scenarios that the EIA looks at. So if you look at these slides, which I'm happy to make available, and Roxanne already and Patricia already have them. But anyway, if you look at these slides, you will see that they look at slightly different scenarios. There's the reference scenario that's in the middle. There's the high price, low price of oil, and then high carbon and low carbon addressing. So you see the different scenarios that they're looking at. They're not super different, but they are somewhat different in terms of the division of the percentages across the different categories that you see over here on the right. So that's, excuse me, that's what the EIA is telling us. I want to turn to ExxonMobil. What they do here is you can see the different bars for oil, gas, coal, solar. They break out, as you can see, biomass and hydro as separate categories because they're more traditional renewables, you might say, and biofuels. So the point is you don't quite see the percentages here. I'll give you the percentages later on. But you do see, if you look carefully, you see the rate of growth that ExxonMobil is projecting for the different categories, annual rate of growth from 2021 to 2050. So the horizontal axis, as you can see, are the different categories. The vertical is total energy in quadrillion BTU. That's a measure of the heat content. And so they're looking at moderate growth in oil and natural gas annually over the next 30 years. You can see that coal is the one category that, while still significant, they're forecasting a reduction. Wind and solar right now is relatively small, but they project a significant rate of increase, and then the other ones are, as you see over there. So what I'm pointing out to you, ladies and gentlemen, as you look at these different forecasters, they are in broad agreement with each other on what the categories will be in terms of their contribution to the global energy contribution and production. So that's
Ron,
actually,
we do
please,
have a
please.
question that came
Yeah,
in.
please.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So with
I like
respect to renewables, are
Yes.
you seeing any shift in policy under the current administration?
You know, I was going to address that at the end, but I'm happy to address it now. There is clearly a change between the current administration over the past 8 months and the previous one. But my point to you, Patricia, is this. These forecasts antedate, they precede the current administration. So yes, the current administration has a different philosophy and policy, but these forecasts predate that. So I would not wish anyone, and I'm glad, thank you for that. I really want to emphasize that these forecasts are not conditioned by the different philosophies and the different policies of the current administration. But thank you, that's a great question. Right, so that was ExxonMobil. What you have here is from this consulting company, DNV. I have to go over to the side. You see here the division of the different categories, both graphically and in tabular form. Let me see if I can move the cursor to the right. No, I guess I can't. Okay, so what I'm showing you here is, now, I know it's a little bit harder to see since I can't zoom in right now, but essentially you see the different divisions of the different sources over here, and I'll give you the percentages to which that refers, but I wanted to show you the actual slide from DNV that you see here. The next one I have for you is Bloomberg New Energy Finance, and here I can zoom in. So what they have done here, as you can see, they've got your oil, gas, and coal in the upper area over here. They've got the different renewables over here, and here they've broken out, as others have as well, the older renewables with the new renewables of solar and wind. So you can see them down here in terms of their impact on the total. And again, I'll give you the percentages, of course, towards the end. But you can see how the issue there is. And notice that coal, although clearly declining, is still an important source of fuel. And I mentioned some of the places where it is expected to grow, according to the EIA. So this is the division that you see here. And I'll talk a little bit, if I might, on this issue of oil peak and gas peak in a later slide. This is the IEA. This is the International Energy Agency that is affiliated with the OECD. And I guess what I'd like to point out here is that they have these different scenarios that the IEA looks at. There's the business as usual, and then there are those that have more rapid influence or input, I should say, from the renewables. And that is an issue that I'd like to share a little bit with you on how the IEA is thinking about this issue of the influx of renewables. Because what I have for you here is a sneak preview of their new World Energy Outlook that hasn't been published yet, but Bloomberg somehow got their hands on it. And you can see that the IEA is prepared to walk back their predictions about peak oil and peak gas demand. So a change, if you will, in the philosophy of what it is they're projecting. And these are Bloomberg's words, not mine. Under pressure from European governments and climate activists, they have been looking at more activist scenarios, but they've had to revise their oil and demand projections over time. Again and again is the words Bloomberg is using. And so, for example, there's this U-turn, as they call it, in 2021 when they had to call for more oil supply as prices rose. So the implications are that, of course, no forecaster is entirely immune from these kinds of issues, these kinds of pressures, but they have been particularly impacted, according to the Bloomberg report, by some folks over in the OECD to forecast a reduction, if you will, of the use of oil and gas, calling it stranded because of weakening demand. But that narrative may have to change. And again, Patricia, I don't want you to think of this as just the last 8 months. This is something that I think we've seen for some time, but it is becoming more manifest right now in the forecast that you see here. So that's the issue with the IEA. Let me talk a little bit about nuclear, because this is one where there may be prospects for a doubling of nuclear energy over the next 30 years. So right now we're about 4 or 5%. And I don't need to tell you that we've had these tumultuous events in nuclear from 3 Mile Island, Fukushima, Chernobyl. Again, whether or not these are relevant now, we can debate. But the point is, there has been a significant, I think it is fair to say, a significant NIMBY issue with respect to nuclear energy. So what I have looked at are these two issues that I share with you here. The first are these SMRs. These are small modular reactors. They're about 70% smaller than the traditional nuclear reactors, but they do produce electricity. The second one are these MSRs, molten salt reactors, which also do the same. These, ladies and gentlemen, are both part of generation 4. So generation 4 of nuclear technology, which is safer, more efficient, and more sustainable. So the point I'm making here is that we may see somewhat of a renaissance in nuclear power as we go through the next 30 years. Again, there is the issue of NIMBY, which is probably not going to go away, but it is nice and important and worthwhile to state that our state is a hub for nuclear innovation. So these are MSR projects, molten salt reactors backed by the Department of Energy and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and the governor has been supportive as well. So this is one where I think it's fair to say the state is taking a lead in helping shape a future that may be more low carbon based and based in part on nuclear energy. Whether we can exceed 10% globally, that may be a reach, but I did want you to know that somewhat of a nuclear renaissance does appear to be in existence. So bringing this all together for you, let me share the summary of what I've done here. And so what I've done here is I've laid out the different sources, which I just covered for you. And I've retained the stated policies of the IEA, notwithstanding the fact that perhaps, potentially, ostensibly, they may be backing away from that, but I don't want to do more or say more than what I've said about the Bloomberg report. So what is the summary? The summary is that globally, we're looking at oil and natural gas in the 50 to 55% range, perhaps even as high as 60%, and certainly in the US, that range. In terms of renewable, we're looking at 20 to 25%. That may be an optimistic scenario. Again, I think we may all have qualms about whether this number is untainted, if I may be allowed to use that word, by policy directives from some good colleagues. Coal is likely to decline, but again, the IEA seems to feel, at least globally, not in the US, globally, that it may be up to 20%, which, as I said earlier, is a little bit of a surprise. You can see the traditional sources of renewable in that range over there, 9 to 14%. Those are likely to continue. Patricia, I think, are there issues that you'd like to alert me to, or?
Well, we just got a question in, so I'll just read this out to you. Do any of these stats take into consideration that greatly increased demand for energy to fuel data centers at the time when oil companies are reluctant to ramp up exploration and production because of low prices?
That's a very good question. It pertains not just to oil, but to natural gas as well. The challenge has been, I think they are aware of these. They are aware of these. The challenge has been to ramp up in quite the way that we would want the natural gas component. So it's not the availability of fuel. Those are around. The availability needs to be translated for natural gas into electricity, and it's very difficult to get turbines right now. So we need turbines to generate electricity from natural gas, and those are in very high demand and difficult to get. So I don't think I'm answering the question exactly, but I think that people are aware that there's going to be greater demand, not just from AI, but just in general from the growth, hopefully the growth of the world's economies. And so we will need to generate more electricity and generate more energy. It's a good question.
Do you have any insight on why turbines are so hard to get hold of these days?
Not exactly, Patricia. I think it must be something with the manufacturing process. The demand is certainly there. So people have been demanding this for a while. It may be that manufacturers are concerned about building up their manufacturing capabilities if they're not sure the demand is going to last. So, there is this thing that right now the demand is very strong. I guess maybe they're unsure of how long it will last given national policy. But that's a fact of life that the demand is certainly there and they're producing it as quickly as they can, but there's only so much of it that they could generate.
Okay, we've got a couple other questions.
Sure, yeah.
Do other energy sectors have limitation of liability protections like nuclear does under the Price-Anderson Act?
What do I know about legal protections? I think they have some, but this is one where I'm going to have to punt even more, Patricia, because I don't play a lawyer on TV. And so this is one where I'm less knowledgeable about what the protections are. It is clear with respect to nuclear, as you said, that the support of the government is very important because it's not clear who else can insure these things against the kinds of risks that they have. But I'm not what protections oil and gas companies have, for example. I know they are subject to occasional pressures, obviously, when you have tankers running aground and so forth. So they are subject to penalties at those points.
Okay. And do you have any insights on how transmission issues figure into these energy concerns?
Not into the overall numbers that you see here. I do know, of course, in the state, as I'm sure most people know, we generated where not too many people live in West Texas, and we have to bring it to the central and the south. So there is this issue of high transmission wiring that needs to be established. Most people generally are not fond of having this next door. There's some talk about whether or not these high transmission wires are carcinogenic. I'm not sure what the health science says about that. So there is an issue of bringing it from where it is generated, in Texas at least, from where it is generated to where it is consumed, and that is something that we are investing in.
Okay. Do the inherent interdependencies of oil, coal, and natural gas limit the speed of shifts in the overall energy market?
The speed of shifts. So I'm not sure if this is what you're asking, but it is a lot easier to transmit oil than it is natural gas. So coal is a separate issue, but let me talk about oil and natural gas. I'm a little bit more familiar there. So oil you can put in double-hulled tankers and then ship them around the world, and it takes a while, but they get there. Natural gas is a far more involved process in the sense that you have to liquefy it here, say, or in the Gulf of whatever the Gulf is called. You have to liquefy it in the Gulf, and then you have to transmit it overseas, and then they have to regasify it. So the point is that is an incredibly costly process because, well, it's just incredibly costly. And that adds as much the cost as the actual cost of the fuel itself. So natural gas, to ship it from here to Europe or to Asia, is a process that requires a substantial amount of investment, and then you can start running these ships over to there. But natural gas is a lot more difficult than oil.
Okay. We've got some questions coming in, and I can keep rolling those off, but I just want to make sure that we're give you time to cover everything you want to cover
Sure.
as well.
So let me go ahead a little bit, and I'm happy to
Okay.
stay here until the late afternoon hours. And
I think that the questions are rolling in, so if we don't take a break and let you go forward, we might not get through the whole lecture, and I want to. So
I appreciate that.
it's great questions coming in, though.
Yes,
Yeah.
no, I can see that. They are very good questions. So just to summarize, ladies and gentlemen, as we leave this, you can see that virtually everyone is forecasting 50 to 60% oil and natural gas, around 20% for renewables, and then you have these other categories. So that's the way I strongly recommend you think about 2050, which again is 30 years down the road. So this is not next year. This is looking at a very distant target date that you see over here. Okay, so with that, let me boldly go forward. I want to talk a little bit about BP. our good colleagues across the Atlantic. So the story here is, as you may know, that around 2020, they started using the acronym Beyond Petroleum. I don't know if they use it formally, but at least informally, BP was beginning to be known as Beyond Petroleum in the sense that they wanted to become, as you see here, let me scroll down carefully. They wanted to become a company that is beyond petroleum in terms of investment in non-oil and gas businesses over time. So they were thinking of really a diversification is maybe not the right word, but a transition, if you will, in their company from oil and gas, which they had been doing for 100 years or so, to something else. And you can see all the other laudable objectives they had in terms of moving to a net zero emission within the company. So this is February of 2020. Fast forward to 2025, and now are singing a slightly different tune. I probably shouldn't say it that way. The point is, they are talking about increasing their drilling activities because of the fall in profits and so forth. So, and again, there's a reference here to the current administration. I wouldn't want you to take that super seriously because they had other economic motives in changing their transition from other sources of energy towards oil and natural gas. And so you can see here that they wanted to return to increasing their oil and gas production by more than 50% by the end of the decade. So here's the point I wanted to make. Again, I'm a finance person, so I'm going to look at it in dollars and cents. I realize there are other issues as well. You might want to ask yourself, who paid for this error, if you will, or for these policies over the 5 years from 2020 to 2025? And maybe here I'll pause for climatic effect. So who paid for this? I know you can't quite answer me. The answer is their shareholders. So let me tell you what I'm showing you here. This is a Bloomberg slide that looks at the price changes in BP and the oil industry, the broad category of other oil and gas companies, over the period from February 3rd, 2020, this is before the onset of the crisis, until earlier this year in May. So let me tell you what it is that you're looking at. In the upper panel, the orange line is the equities of oil and gas companies as they went through this period over the past 5 years. The white line underneath is BP, and this is both normalized to 100, so it's normalized to 100, so it's apples versus apples comparison. What can you see for everybody? What you can see for everybody is that as the crisis hit, obviously oil prices fell to very low levels. You probably heard that one day it was negative, but that was only one day. And so oil company equities fell as well. And then they began recovering as the world went back to, fortunately got out of the health crisis and went back to normalcy. We had, of course, the 2022 events in the Ukraine. My point is that for the other oil and gas companies, do you see the number over here? That number over there tells you that now they are 48% higher than they were on February 3rd, 2020. This is the major oil and gas companies. For BP, that number is 15% lower than they were on February 3rd of 2020. So the difference between them is that BP shareholders have earned 63% less than the shareholders of these other companies. So the point is, if you make these kinds of decisions, there are going to be ramifications, and somebody is compelled to bear the brunt of these consequences, and you can see in this case who that was. So that's the story of BP. let me now turn to our colleagues over in the other side of the Atlantic. So I'm sure you know that Europe has been spending a considerable amount on energy transition. They're spending annually about 8% of their GDP, which is, a considerable amount. According to their parliament, they're going to be investing over €500 billion annually from 2030 to 2050. Now, their economy is about 30% smaller than the US economy, but still, as the senator from Illinois said, a billion here, a billion there, pretty soon you're talking real money. So they're spending a considerable amount of money on these transitions that they're trying to do within the European Union. What are the consequences? Well, there are consequences. The consequences are that in Germany, industrial electricity costs 3 times as much as it does in the US. And remember, electricity is important there for the manufacturing production. In the UK, it's 4 times as much. This next statistic I almost found difficult to believe, but I verified it. Britons now consume less electricity per person than the Chinese do. In Germany, overall electricity consumption is lower than it was before the Berlin Wall fell in 1989. So you've had these important consequences. Is it fair to blame all of this on energy transition? It's not. Obviously, these people are doing it for good reasons, but you can see that the consequences of these policy actions are fairly dramatic. What is the counterpoint? The counterpoint is that eventually, the hope is that they will have lower costs, they will have helped fight climate change, and they create green jobs. But the transition, as I think you can see from here, is indeed considerable. This is not a low-cost endeavor for our good friends over in the European continent. So that's what I wanted to share basically on that. Let me summarize and then turn to as many questions as Patricia has. I originally started looking at this before the inauguration of the current administration. I don't want you to think that these numbers are purely reflective of the last 8 months. That's not the case. These numbers have been around for a while, and the numbers I reported to you, some of them predate the inauguration of the current administration. So my point was at the time that the Inflation Reduction Act may have caused people to think that we were about to not need the traditional sources of energy. That's not the case. That's not the case. We're going to need them for the foreseeable future. In terms of the percentages, I've repeated this, I'll just summarize it here. Renewables may rise to 20-25% of global energy needs. The historical sources will provide at least, oil and natural gas, will provide at least 50, as much as 60% of consumption to the mid-21st century, and hopefully nuclear will add an additional 8 to 10%. I don't want to get too much into policy implications as I conclude, but the point is that it is prudent for governments to ensure stability and reliability of oil and natural gas and let the market determine the optimal amount of investment. And so in point of focus on reliable energy sources, that is another important issue for policymakers. And I think in this regard, the prospects for nuclear may be a lot brighter than we thought several years ago, about the 8 to 10%. And our state, the state of Texas, is actually leading in producing that source of energy. So that's what I wanted to present, Patricia, and I am absolutely delighted to address any questions that people may have.
Okay. Let's go back to the SMRs for a second. We've got a couple of questions on those.
Sure.
So Andy comments and he said, I've heard an argument that nuclear SMRs won't really scale because they lack economies of scale compared to larger plants. So what's your thoughts on how that translates to forecasting variance?
So again, I don't think the forecast here has been particularly aggressive, but I think Andy is right that there are issues with this in terms of, as I say here, lead times, capital costs, skilled workforce, and the NIMBY issue. So I'm not unsympathetic to that. I think we might be able to get to 8 to 10%. Remember, we're at 4 and 5 now. So It is a modest increase, but I think this is one that is well worth looking at it, not just because the state is involved, but because it is one that is low carbon based. And so that is a desirable attribute right there, but I'm not unsympathetic to the concerns about
And for my own knowledge,
that.
who is the market for those? I mean, really, what's the market?
I would say broadly it is electricity, Patricia. So that's what we're going to use nuclear for. That's what we have been
Yeah,
using nuclear for. But, with all these demands, that some of which you alluded to, both in the state and without, for additional sources of electricity, you can see that anything that helps is
yeah.
a valuable asset.
Okay. So back to the shortage on turbines. This question is it possible that Texas will get into another situation where we have an electrical blackout because we don't have those turbines?
So I think the issue, if they're referring to Uri, was not so much the lack of turbines, it was the fact that some things froze up and we couldn't deliver it to power plants and so on. We've done a fair amount of weatherizing. So the state has done something to improve the resilience of our exposure um, to cold weather. We have done some work on that. I guess time will tell whether we've managed to do enough. But the point is that the state has done several things to weatherize the transmission of natural gas to protect it against harsh weather, which for us is in the winter.
Yeah. Kind of flipping back to nuclear, is the availability of cheap energy in the US would seem to dissuade nuclear development short term. Do you see a specific economic tipping point for nuclear investment?
So the issue with nuclear is that the marginal cost is very low once you've got it up and running. It's the fixed cost that needs to
Yeah.
be overcome. And so there, the issue of pricing is a little bit more difficult to address. I would say that what I think nuclear needs, is the issue of some kind of either protection or insurance, because really there are some things that only the government can insure because of the potential risks, and no insurance company, even if they want to, would have credibility in insuring those things. So what we need is to have the necessary support from the federal government in terms of producing these things in a way that people can have confidence that we will do it safely and hopefully not need to address any breakdowns.
Okay. I'm going to pivot just a second, and then we have a great AI question, so I'll go back to that one.
Okay.
So back to transmission process. What does the loss of generated energy look like during the transmission process? Do you have knowledge of that?
Not the exact numbers. I do know we lose. So obviously there is a loss over distances. I don't have the exact number for you, but it is true that the longer we have to take it, the more we lose along the way. I guess that's not particularly profound, but that is a reality.
Okay. Um, how much natural gas is lost to flaring? And do you want to expand on what flaring means for our audience?
Yes, yes. So there's less and less of that going on. Flaring basically was a time when the extraction of the primary source of energy was oil. The gas that came with it was flare, was just basically burnt because there wasn't a way of getting it to the market, and so people couldn't use it. Obviously, it's a bad thing in terms of emissions because it, generates carbon emissions. So people wanted to discourage that. My sense is, Patricia, that the majors don't do that anymore because they either store it or they have now pipelines to move it. Some of the miners, the small ones, may not have invested in much. So it's not nearly as big a thing as it was, but it still may be around for some of the smaller producers. But
Gotcha.
yeah, it's not as big a thing as it was.
As it was before. Okay.
Yeah, when you looked at
Um,
when you looked at North Dakota at night, it looked like the entire state was populated by millions of people, which regrettably for North Dakota is not the case. But that was because of all the flaring that made it seem like there was a lot of demand. So that part I think
gotcha.
is a lot better now, but it's still, yeah, it is.
That's true. Drove through West Texas during the evening hours and didn't see as much of that recently. So that's true. Okay, so to AI. Energy production will be critical to winning the AI race. Over the past 15 years, I think we've gone from around 4,100 TWHs of energy to something like 43 in the US, while China has gone from less than 4K to over 9K over the same period. So, how do we thoughtfully generate the growth in energy production needed to close the gap and effectively compete from a technology standpoint? I
Can I
love
say
that
that?
question.
Yeah, no, that's an easy one. Right. I like the easy questions first. We clearly need more turbines in order to generate, to be able to use the natural gas that we have, but those are regrettably not coming in as quickly as we would need them. So basically, I don't know that nuclear can step in and make the difference. I realize we have demand that may start pushing up prices as we demand more and more for these. But yes, I think I agree with the questioner that we need more electricity, not just in the state, but throughout the nation to be able to address that. And so, yes, we're going to need more energy sources. I guess that's not profound, but that's a true statement.
Okay. Um, where are the European countries going to get the funds for the energy transition now that they've committed to an increase in NATO dues and appear to be gearing up for increased hostilities with Russia over Ukraine unless they sacrifice domestic social spending, when the may already be restless?
No, I
Another
think,
good question.
yeah, another easy question. Boy, you're getting me all the easy ones. No, I think it is true. I don't want to repeat the title of the article here. Europe is challenged in a number of ways. There was a quote in that article which I cannot resist sharing with you. I think it was one from the Italian Prime Minister that she said the US innovates, the Chinese imitate, and the Europeans regulate. And so
Mm.
that, yeah, and so that is what they do. You're right. They have to spend a lot more on defense. They don't want to presumably reduce their social spending. What Germany has done, as some of you may know, is they've relaxed their debt issue. So they've passed a constitutional amendment or whatever the equivalent of that is over there so that they can borrow more money. So they are going to have to go in that direction. The issue of borrowing, however, is as pronounced in Europe as it is here in the sense that both the French and the British are also borrowing a lot. So you're right, there is this issue at some point in time where they have these multiple demands: defense, social spending, energy, and these are all colliding against people's reluctance to spend as much. So I think, and I want to be hesitant here because I'm not a political scientist. Part of the issue that you're seeing in Germany, France, and the UK is this resistance to the higher prices that they're forced to pay due to the transition. But whether that will actually cause a change in policy, that's above my pay grade.
Okay. Um, Energy consumption and higher cost in Europe are partly as a result of use and cost of the extended public transportation infrastructure. Do you have any comments on that?
So I may have missed part of what you said there, Patricia. So could you repeat the first part? I think we lost
Sure.
things. Yeah.
Yeah, we lost just a little bit. I
Yeah.
wonder if the reduced energy consumption and higher cost in Europe are partly a result of use and cost of their extended public transportation infrastructure.
So, one of the things that, let me answer it this way. You might ask yourself is if there is deindustrialization going on in Germany as there was in England back in the 1980s. The answer is it's not quite as bad as this because they do have more services. But for a manufacturing economy, uh, electricity is still critical for generation and for the production of the things that Germans are good at, which is some of these smaller items of manufacturing that they have traditionally exported for long periods of time. So they still need to have that manufacturing, even though they are, as we are as well, more of a services economy. I don't know that I would necessarily talk about the transportation segment as much as I'm talking about, and I'm sure that helps, as I'm talking about the issue of manufacturing versus services. But they still need it, Germany and these others, they still need the electricity, and it is making them less competitive when they have to pay this amount. So I would say, Patricia, it's more a matter of a change in the economy that is less manufacturing than it used to be, but that's still not an answer to the issue of what is it that they're going to do about their manufacturing sector.
Okay. Next question. How do the cost of the global disasters that are made worse due to climate change compare with the cost of the clean energy transition?
I love to get into politics, as you know. I really try to avoid this. I guess the way I think about it is, and this is controversial, so I'll just share my thoughts. I would prefer that we as a society pay to ameliorate damage rather than try to prevent it. What I mean by that is, if Miami is going to be impacted by rising water levels, let us spend money on levees and things like that, that people can see that we are protecting them against the water. So my sense is that it would be more efficient to actually prevent these things rather than try to reduce overall emissions and thereby prevent temperatures from rising globally. So that is my view. I wouldn't say it's my view as necessarily a scientist, but it is my view in terms of the way I think about the policy implications.
Sounds good. And kind of back to nuclear plants. Are there any new nuclear plants currently development in Texas or the US that you can talk about?
So I do know that we are at the forefront of this. I don't know exactly where we are in terms of actually building these things, but this is one of those areas where we are, as I say here, an innovation, how people are thinking about it, doing it, and so forth. So if there are prospects for this in those generation four, it's likely to come here as it is almost anywhere else because of the both investment and support that we're getting from the national and state governments.
Okay, so back to markets a little bit. With the belief in letting the market decide, what is your
Right.
view on subsidies for specific types of energy versus taxes to address the tragedy of common issues with other forms?
So I am a free market person by construction. As you know, there are presumably very few Marxists in finance departments. So my point is that I would like to let the market determine the optimal amount of investment in these things because I think the market will do a better job than the government will. Now, there is the issue of externalities. And I get that is something we need to address in terms of what to do about sort of pollution and possible impact on some of our infrastructure, both on the coasts and inland. And I guess there, as I said a moment ago, Patricia, my sense is that we should ameliorate rather than prevent, because I think politically that is more sustainable in the sense that people actually see us doing something to help them, whereas this issue of preventing global temperature rise is a far more generic and it's difficult to see kind of thing. So that
Yeah.
is where I recommend we devote our resources, is to ameliorate rather than prevent. Now, you might well ask, well, so we need to fund that. And I think that's a good point. We do need to fund that. We can't just keep borrowing money. So if necessary, we should tax ourselves a little bit more to be able to provide that kind of amelioration to people who are subject to either water surface rise or fires in the western part of the country. We do need to address those issues. Yes. So that's my answer. My answer is we should ameliorate and we should fund those things where necessary from the general purse.
Okay, so if you were placing a bet on the most likely energy innovation to dramatically impact the forecasts, what would it be? Geothermal, fusion? What's your thoughts?
That's a good question, too. I guess my sense, Patricia, is I don't know if this is what you're asking, but if you're asking me what the biggest surprise might be, I think the biggest surprise might be a really renaissance in our nuclear production. And we've sort of been stalled for the last 50 years, maybe, because of these different things that have impacted the policy aspect. If we can address the policy aspect and come up with sources of nuclear energy that are feasible, reasonably priced, and so forth, I think that's likely to be a surprise. Now, if you're asking me whether we can invest in that individually, I'm not sure that I can point right now to a company where you and I could invest our funds in, but I think that is where the most likely surprise, positive surprise, is likely to come in terms of the mix that we're looking at.
I love that answer. It was a good one. Thank you.
Yeah, the
Okay,
others were not
so
as good.
no, that one was wonderful. It's just that I was like, that's a hard question.
Yeah.
That's a crystal ball sort of question. Um, so back to coal for just a second.
Yes.
Do you see planned coal plant shutdowns being deferred due to increased demand for data centers and economic growth, and supplies labor issues with developing more sources?
That's certainly a potential. I think that what is likely to happen is
Coal plant
also,
shutdowns being
well,
deferred. Yeah.
right. I think we're also more likely to defer shutdowns of nuclear facilities and let them, if we can store the refuse, let them continue on producing beyond what was their original plan. I think that is likely to happen. I think if necessary, we'll keep the coal burning, if you will, if we really need the energy. But I think that it is pretty much understood by virtually everybody that that is an undesirable source, and without coal capturing the emissions, that's not likely to generate much popular support. So it's more likely, I think, we'll keep the nuclear going for a while longer, and we'll keep coal only if it's absolutely necessary to keep things going. The other thing you should know, Patricia, is that, when we have a hot day in Texas and we need more energy, the kind of reserves we have is not coal. It is basically natural gas, and natural gas that we can sort of fire up and use more if the sun goes away or the wind stops blowing. So coal is not the kind of energy that you can turn on a dime by flipping a switch. It's a much more lengthy process. So in answering to your question, it's going to have to be more thoughtful longer term, because it's not something that we can do on a day-to-day basis, which is something we can do with our natural gas-fired plants.
Okay. Just a couple more questions. The oil and gas industries have had tax breaks for many years, and many people might not understand that. Can you talk about that?
So I was trying to be sort of comprehensive in saying, I don't think we need to subsidize anyone. We should let the market determine the optimal amount of investment. I'm sure people can come up with reasons why we should let the oil depletion allowance stay around. But my point is, I think we should let the market determine that and just get out of the way and provide for what the market comes up with. So as a free market person, perhaps a little bit of a libertarian, I'm suggesting that we step out of the way on that issue.
Okay. Um, Pivoting just a little bit, what are your thoughts on the future of fusion power sources and the current development of facilities of ITR and fusion's future scaling?
Yeah, from what I've read, Patricia, the greatest promise is in these SMRs and MSRs. That's what I've read in terms of what is likely to be propelling us into a brighter nuclear future. It's these things that are, I think, more promising than the other ones. But that's what I've read, and that's what I propose to you here.
Okay. Do you have any knowledge of the small molten salt nuclear plants that are in development in Texas? This one user has mentioned that they're in their infancies, and
Right.
larger plants have been in development for 40 years without success. But molten salt, the problem with it is it's highly corrosive on valves and metal pipes. So, do you think that their development will go anywhere? Will it increase?
My sense is that we have decided to look at that with some impetus in the state, yes. And so I think that, again, there are these issues that people do have to face, but my sense is that the state and the nation have decided to look at this very carefully in order to see whether there is a promise to that. And that might, as I said earlier, might overall double our production of nuclear from the 4 or 5% to the 8-10% that we're looking at. So my sense is that this is showing promise. There are issues to deal with, but it is showing promise.
Okay. And last question, is there a chance the grid could be nationalized due to national security? What do you think about that? Is there discussion on that?
Trying to think if I've seen something along those lines. So for example, one of the things, I'll take a little bit of a side trip here. One of the things we have on the oil side, Patricia, is we have these 5 pads. They are Petroleum Administration for Defense Districts. So this is something the federal government set up during World War II, and then again at the beginning of the Korean War to manage oil throughout the US. So I haven't seen anything like that on the electricity side. As I think you know, most people know, ERCOT, the Electrical Reliability Council of Texas, we're sort of an energy island almost. We have very little interaction with the rest. So, and the rest are sort of organized in regional ISOs where they transmit electricity within a certain region. So the federal government does monitor these things and regulate them. They don't regulate ERCOT because it's entirely within Texas. But I think that's as far as the federal government has gone to look at these things. I think the reason may be, I'm going to hazard a little bit guess here, it's very difficult to convey these for very long distances. So one thing you might ask yourself is, why didn't California bail us out during Uri? Well, to bring electricity from California takes a huge amount of investment time, and you lose some along the way. So these things are just not technologically feasible. And that may be why the federal government has chosen to be involved in the way that it has been by letting these different ISOs, which are more than one state except for ERCOT, manage their electricity grids in the different parts of the country.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for being with us, Dr. Ronn. It was wonderful to talk with you. And thanks to everyone who joined us today. For our October lunchtime lecture, we will be gathering in person at the Alumni Center with Dr. David Reif from the Moody College of Communication for his lecture, The Future of Journalism. You can purchase tickets right now at texasexes.org/lunchtime lectures, and you'll probably be getting some emails about that too. So until next time, we'll see you there. Take care and hook 'em.
Hook 'em, Mark.